a Manousso Musing with Patricia Barret on lifetime planning and family mediations. That is our topic for today on Manousso Musing with seasoned mediator trainer, Dr. Barbara Manousso. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hey everyone, this is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Ołowska-Czajka, based in Warsaw, Poland, advocate and mediator.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manousso, based in Houston, Texas, and Newport, Rhode Island, and a trainer and a practitioner. And part of my training team is very, very fortunate and honored to have as one of our lecturers, Patricia Barret, who is our guest today. And her program is Lifetime Planning. And Patricia is not only a mediator, but she has initials after her name that give her a higher regard to help people who are going through a divorce, or if a family needs planning for elder and adult care. That's another opportunity. But today we're going to focus on the family mediation. So I want to welcome you, Patricia. Thank you for being on the program. And Manousso Musing is always delighted to have wisdom from people who have extensive background. And you've got pages of resume with lots of articles, lots of presentations you've given. So my first question is to bring people up to speed why you are different and so important to the mediation table and to the mediation process. Could you explain what a CFP is and what a CDFA is? Because I know those are important credentials.
Right. Okay. The CFP stands for Certified Financial Planning. So there are millions of financial planners, but to become a certified financial planner, you have to take years of college level courses and pass a rigorous exam. The CDFA stands for Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. And this requires that you already be a CFP or a CPA, and that you take additional courses in family law and, of course, the financial planning intricacies.
Well, that's marvelous. So this is what you bring to our training program, number one, which is a delight for us. But number two, when you have a client, and I know that people, other mediators even use you, will bring you into their mediation. So you're there to do just the financial planning or the financial part. And as we all know, the financial part in a family mediation are the bones of what's going on. If you want to say it's the skeleton in the closet. So with that being said, what are the top 3 issues that are misunderstood when someone is going through divorce?
Okay, one is what is separate property and what is community property. So many people assume that you add $1 to your separate property account during marriage and it's mingled. Well, that's not accurate, because a CDFA or a forensic CPA can sort this out and figure out what's community and what is separate property. And not only in financial accounts, but also in the home. The home, even if owned prior to marriage and it's separate, can have a community reimbursement due to the payments made during the marriage. So that's number one, would be separate and community property. I guess number 2 is the division of assets in an equitable manner. So that means if there's a high earner and a lower earner, that the lower earner would probably get more than 50% of the assets. There's no law that it's 50-50, and would probably get more of the liquid assets like cash and marketable securities. Now, I'm talking about mostly higher dollar cases, because that's usually what I deal with that needs my level of expertise. Now, let's see, the third thing, most important thing, of course, are the child issues. And this affects the financials, of course, because the budgeting is different. The amount of child support, the amount of time with each parent, which they often think affects the amount of child support. So, for instance, if there is 50-50 time with each parent, it doesn't automatically eliminate child support. That's a fallacy on the part of most people.
And when you are saying that you are doing lifetime planning and you do family mediation, how do these two intersect?
Okay, good question. All right. So in my previous life, before I started my company 19 years ago, I worked for a trust company. I did intricate financial plans that look at the future. That starts, of course, with your assets, and then you do a budget and tax table. And then this carries over into a long-term cash flow to see where you're going to be 20 years down the road based on different levels of inflation and appreciation on the assets. So now, of course, going through divorce, like Barbara said, this is the bones of the case, is how am I going to be okay in the future? So that's where the lifetime planning comes in. Decisions made during the divorce can affect you for the rest of your life.
Yes,
That's how they intersect.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for all of this information. As you might know, Natalia and myself, we do family law for a living day to day in our jurisdictions. So this is something that's close to our hearts, because we're always dealing with people who are going through a divorce process and then wondering, like you said, how are they going to be okay? So do you deal also with retirement accounts and how that factors in?
Yes, of course. That's a big part of the puzzle. In fact, the major assets for most people are their home and their retirement accounts. Now, those are not necessarily equal dollar for dollar. So a $500,000 house and a $500,000 IRA are not equal, because the IRA is fully taxable.
Yep.
So every dollar that comes out of that IRA or 401k is going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. So I sometimes subtract a imputed tax from the value of the IRA just to bring it into alignment tax-wise.
Yeah, and Patricia, you can hear us, correct?
I can hear you, but I couldn't see you. So I kept talking. I hope that.
Yeah, no, you're perfect.
You did well, Patricia. That was a good answer too. It's an important answer.
And one more follow-up. Thank you for saying basically that it's not always 50-50 when we come down to dividing this stuff. The law actually uses terms like just and right division or an equitable division, right? How to balance things out. But you don't know how many times we hear people coming into us, clients who are like, oh, I want half the sofa, or I want, they want everything down the middle, down the line, 50-50, when that's not exactly how it works, especially when people start throwing stones and accuse people of adultery or cruelty, abandonment, and reimbursements. This gets complicated real quick. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one thing I work very hard on, is calculating a reimbursement. My most recent case, for instance, the husband had a townhouse before marriage, and he rented it out all during the marriage, put all the rental income into his separate account. But the wife was paying all the property taxes and the homeowners association and everything out of the joint account. So now the community, that's her and him, they have been paying expenses on his separate property. So this is going to require careful sorting to figure out how much of a reimbursement needs to go to the community. I do this all the time.
But Patricia, you that's a wonderful story. And I bet you have a basket full of stories to tell like that. Could you also address, I know when people call, and I don't like doing divorce unless I like to do gray divorce. And the gray divorce is when people are in their 60s, 70s, there's no children involved. And it sometimes is painful to watch, but sometimes there's more opportunity for value added. So you're not cutting the baby down the middle, so to speak. But what value added have you seen that was maybe creative in something that you've done? Using your credentials are outstanding. So I'm sure you've had cases that are complicated, but where a value added was something unexpected, or just took a twist to the mediation process or the solution, let's say.
Okay. I think one example would be using alimony. And I know people think there's no alimony in Texas, but if it's by agreement, you can have it. And we're not going to get into court-ordered maintenance since that's rarely used. But like in the example I just gave about the reimbursement that's going to be due to the wife, and it may be in the area of $100,000. Well, if they don't have $100,000, he could pay her alimony for X number of years to pay her off for her part of the community property that was improperly invested in his property. So they would never think of using alimony and even think of it as a dirty word. So sometimes I say property settlement note.
Oh.
Okay. And to me, it's kind of the same, but legally, I believe that the alimony is more protected by law. It can't be pushed aside because of bankruptcy or so I think it's more protected to use that word. Am I right, Mac?
Oh, well, remember, we try not to give legal advice on these kind of shows.
Oh, sorry.
People are going to depend on it and sue me. So.
And Natalia and Mac are attorneys as well as mediators.
I'll ask Natalia next time. And then she can tell me there's no legal advice.
We won't give any legal
Absolutely.
We want to give the picture. We want to give a financial picture. So Natalia, I think you had a question.
Of course I do.
Yes.
I have lots of questions. These days, the situation is really heavy all over the world. We hear about inflation. I'm in Poland, so we're also affected by the war in Ukraine. The prices are going up so quickly. The inflation rate here is 17%. I know it's better in the States.
Wow.
But that all brings us to the point where the financial decisions are even more severe than previously. More and more, I'm having cases where the man earns more, the wife less. They have a common property. There is a mortgage rate that currently is twice as much as it used to be. They want to separate. And of course, the wife has no life chances to buy herself a property. And most probably, it would be great if she stays there. And however, with her little salary, she might not afford to pay the mortgage. The man wants to be absolutely debt-free because he's starting his new life. And more, I'm having cases where sometimes I'm giving people a piece of legal advice, which sounds sorry, but you can't afford to be apart. You don't have enough money to finance your separate lives. Do you see something like that? Or in general, Also, do you give advice in this sort of senses to try and figure out those sort of bridge strategies, which I'm also trying to invent sometimes, to really try to make things work for everybody in the picture?
Yes, of course, this is my job, because the part of financial planning that is important here is budgeting. And as you say, the lower earning spouse can probably not afford to keep the home. It may be possible for her to remain in the home for 1 or 2 years and then sell it. So you see, you can play with these numbers, and it's all going to be a matter of her budget. And I provide a detailed questionnaire to help her establish what is her necessary spending as opposed to discretionary. And we come up with the amount that will allow her, when we're looking at the future, to be successful financially. Now, I don't focus only on the wife. I have to make it work for the husband as well. So it depends on his earnings level, his expected bonuses. If he's an executive, he may have stock options or restricted stock that vest in the future. So we need to take all the pieces of the puzzle and look at this as a business expense, a business deal. Instead of letting the emotions get involved, look at it as if we're trying to make each party successful in the future. And that's where my financial planning tables come into play.
Yeah. And
Well, that's
Patricia,
good advice, Patricia. And I like it that you use the terms, this is a business deal. When I do a mediation, that's what I also say to them. Whatever happened in the past, you're not going to change it. You've had a chance to vent. You've had a chance to talk about it. Now let's get down to the business side. What's going to be your advantage, both of your advantages? And that's always something that people are surprised to hear, because they still want to kill the other side with their sword. And another question I have for you, when you're working with people, debt has been such a big issue now because COVID, and depending on what type of business somebody had. How do you handle no money? How does that get restructured to go forward?
Okay, as I mentioned, I normally work with the higher net worth individuals, but what I have to emphasize to everyone is that when you put that debt on the financial statement in your column and the other party has little debt, you're going to get enough assets to cover the debt. So it's like a negative 20,000 and it requires a positive 20,000 just to bring you to even. So it's not always a bad thing to keep the debt. And I encourage my clients to each keep the credit cards in their own name, keep the auto loan in their own name, take the other party off as authorized user, and move forward without any joint debt, except maybe the loan on the home, which can be worked out through the attorney with a legal document called a deed of trust to secure assumption. So the main thing is that the debt just has to be brought into play, and I get a credit report on each party. I want to know every outstanding debt, credit card and debt. So even if it's got a zero balance, that account needs to be assigned to one party or the other. So that's what I tell them. We're not only dividing assets, we're dividing debt as well.
and absolutely, I told that to my own clients that that debt can actually help you have some leverage in getting other stuff, right? Because people never want debt, but if it exists, it needs to be dealt with. And I recall a mediation I went to years ago where the wife kept the house, but she kept all of the debt. And so I remember thinking, she's probably just going to file for bankruptcy after the divorce, get rid of all the debt, and keep the house because it's her homestead. And, gotta say, touche, well played by the other side. So, yeah, there's not necessarily only bad when you keep all the debt.
Patricia, That's great information for helping people at the divorce table. And I value that a great deal, because I think that people don't always plan ahead. And we will do another segment with you where we talk about how people can plan. And I know when a bride is blushing and she's all excited and they go to a bridal fair, the last thing they want to think about is something not working out on the back end. But I think a lot of women now are getting married older, so they have that opportunity. They're more business minded. I think the days of being just the sweet young thing are does not go across the board anymore, where people are a little bit more business savvy, and so that's an opportunity. And does anybody have one final question, Natalia?
What I would want to ask is a general advice for people in terms of finances who are heading for divorce from your perspective. People sometimes think, oh, is it worthwhile buying a house now? Isn't it worthwhile paying off my debts? Is it worthwhile, I don't know, buying the new car now so that we have the tool? It will be easier to separate. Is there a general advice that you would be giving to people who know that their marriage is going through a crisis that might end up with divorce? What sort of financial decisions should people consider or refrain from?
I believe they should not incur any new debt. They should not buy a house together, not buy a new car until they determine what the numbers are going to look like. This is not a time to be increasing the amount of debt. And I did want everybody in the audience to know that to get a credit report, you can get it on yourself or your spouse. You go to annualcreditreport.com. and it's free. Annualcreditreport.com. And you can get a free credit report and size up your debt as opposed to your assets. And make sure that you are not going to incur too much debt. You need liquid assets when you're going through divorce, and that's bank accounts or brokerage accounts, in order to pay your attorney and hopefully your CDFA as well.
Well, Patricia, your words of wisdom always are so thoughtful and so important, because, as we said, the financial part of dissolving a marriage is the money that is going to impact people the rest of their lives. And so thank you for being on Manousso Musing. And it's Patricia Barret. She's a CFP and a CDFA with lifetime planning for family mediation. So thank you for being with us today and sharing your pearls of wisdom. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you.